Well, ni hao and welcome. During lockdown, my family has been playing a whole bunch of board games. And this is one of the board games we have in our house, the Game of Life Junior Edition. And the whole idea is you spin the wheel and you take your little car around this game of life and you experience a whole bunch of adventures. And the one who experiences the most adventures gets to win the game. And there are some pretty cool adventures to be had. There are mud puddles, which would be pretty cool. Maybe not for a whole bunch of us either, but I think they're pretty cool. There's the zoo, there's treasure hunts, and of course there's the chocolate factory. I mean, you really want to experience that one. But as you go around the board, there's also some things you really don't want to experience. The difficulties, the frustrations that come our way. A seagull stole your sandwich at the picnic. That's not so cool. You got caught taking cookies. Your ball got stuck in a tree. The monkey stole your banana. These are the cards you don't want to get in your way around the board. See, this is the Game of Life Junior Edition. And in many ways, this book of Ecclesiastes that we're in is looking at this game of life. And the quester, as we've come to call the author, is effectively writing this open letter to us. It's this honest and raw assessment on the way life works. And he says you need to understand the way life works if you're going to enjoy the reality of life in the here and now. So as we come to the finale of our series today, we hear the quester bring home a couple of themes that he wants us to remember and to grapple with. And the first is this: don't let difficulties distract you from enjoying life. Rather, make the most of the time you have. He writes this in chapter 11. When people live many years, let them rejoice in every day of life. But let them also remember there will be many dark days. There's two key words here: rejoice and remember. Rejoice, but remember there's going to be many dark days. Now, the question might sound a bit of a killjoy, but the truth is, he actually believes that understanding that disappointment and injustice and grief, they're all part and parcel of getting around this board of life, understanding that the fall has affected every single thing throughout life. And if we're going to enjoy life, we need to understand this reality. So he knows if we're going to be enjoying the adventures of life, we're on our way around this board of what we might be doing. We get to the chocolate factory, we get to that museum. You can add to that. We enjoy that new relationship. We enjoy that new job promotion. We buy a home. But the quester also notes, hey, you're going to run into some trouble. The monkey is going to steal your banana from time to time. There are going to be some difficulties that come your way. And if you don't anticipate it, as you get around the board, it's going to affect you and you're not going to enjoy life. And so throughout this book of Ecclesiastes, he's been using a particular word 38 times now. Did you remember that Hebrew word? Yeah, chevel. And chevel means a breath or mist or smoke. In fact, it's one of those words that sounds like what it's trying to describe. Chevel. It's like this deep sigh as we try to deal with the frustrations that we're trying to make sense of. And he says life is full of moments where you just sigh. It's easy, I think, particularly for Christians to almost downplay the chevel, those frustrations we experience in life. But whether you're Christian or not, we all experience the reality of life in a fallen world, the moments that just cause you to sigh, these deep sighs. So what do we do with the frustrations? Well, the quester says, rejoice while you are young, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. So he hones in on youth here, and he's not really talking about next generation so much as everybody in a category that still has freedom to take risks and time to go in new directions, a future that's still so full of possibilities. And he says to anybody in that wide category, listen up, rejoice. Follow the impulses of your heart, he says here. Follow the desires of your eyes, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Now, I want you to notice the commands here. Rejoice or be happy. Follow the impulses of your heart. In other words, go for it. God commands joy. We often think of commands as a bad thing, but commands, God is commanding joy and happiness, and they're not optional extras for us. And yes, you might have noticed the verse mentions judgment. And perhaps the quester is reminding us to live responsibly amidst our freedom and joy. And that's certainly true. But a number of good Bible expositors say this isn't actually the best way to read the verse. It's more likely that the quester is saying to us to enjoy all that God has made, all this world that God has made, because one day God will hold you to account for the way you have or haven't enjoyed it. In fact, one scholar wrote of this verse, human beings are supposed to enjoy life to the full because that is their divinely assigned portion. And God calls us to account for failure to enjoy it. Last weekend, Arwen and I made this scrumptious cherry pie. And it took us like a whole weekend, or not whole weekend, but a whole morning to make this cherry pie. And the whole family, thankfully, they loved it. But imagine that you had baked to your heart's content and you served up your delicacy on a beautiful plate, and you had the cream or ice cream right there and the cake fork. But then your whole family kind of consume it while they're distracted in front of the TV, and then they're not really enjoying it, and they don't give you any praise for all the work that you've done. If you were the chef, you would be offended by that, because the whole purpose of making something so good for others is to see them find enjoyment in the work of your hands. And I think in the same way, God has placed that first ray of morning sun in front of you, the full rainbow in the sky with that dark cloud behind it. The gifts and abilities He's given you, the resources He's given you, He wants you to enjoy it. He's made it. He's given it to you to enjoy. He doesn't want you to be distracted by the difficulties. You might say, well, But JD, there's a whole bunch of difficulties going on. I mean, haven't you heard about the pandemic? And yeah, there's a whole lot of frustrations in our world. And the quester has spoken about these in this book, with that word chevel. So what do we do with the frustrations? He says to us in verse 10, banish emotional stress from your mind. Put away pain from your body, for youth and the prime of life are chevel, they're fleeting. Now, this isn't denying that very real suffering, both emotionally and physical suffering, exists in our world. Instead, he's trying to change our perspective on the way we so easily stew over the things that are going on in our life. See, emotional stress, this can be a range of things. It could be irritation. It could be offenses that we take, anxiety or vexing. I think of them as like negative fertilizer in those big three kind of weeds that sprout up in our life. Things like complaint, anxiety, and envy. And these three weeds, as I like to reflect on them, is, they all have one thing in common. Complaint focuses on what is going wrong. Anxiety focuses on what might go wrong. And envy on what's going right with somebody else, in other words, not me. And they all have this idea that my happiness is contingent on my circumstances. And the quest is saying to us, the reality is you can't actually control a whole lot of circumstances around you. And if you're going to say that the circumstances have to be right until you enjoy things, you're not going to enjoy life around this game of life. It's going to feel like you're chasing after the wind. It's going to dissipate through your fingers because you can't clutch it. But what you can control, he says, is whether you will allow it to chew you up and spit you out and distract you from enjoying the good things that God has placed right in front of you. Now, lockdowns would be in that category of frustration, obviously. But if our pandemic has taught us anything, it's the things we often counted on, the work, the leisure, the travel, the society, even our family. Sometimes they fracture. Sometimes these things that we trusted in, they fall apart. And so as you move around the board, the quester says, enjoy the adventures, those chocolate factories, whatever is in front of you. Don't allow the the seagull stealing your sandwich to affect the picnic. Don't allow that monkey stealing your banana to bring you down. Rather enjoy what is right in front of you. Rather than dwell on what's not right, turn your gaze on what is right and what is good. You see, no matter what age we are, it's so easy for us to get stuck on what isn't right rather than to celebrate what is right. And in many of these situations, we start to ask a particular question: what is life?
What is life?
Life is about different seasons.
A time to live, a time to die.
A time to laugh and a time to cry.
Life is complicated. There are always problems.
Friends who come and go.
Disagreements with family, disappointments. They disturb the calmness.
And troubles that come along too often.
Things that I want to happen that don't. Places I want to go, but can't.
Things I should do, but won't.
Is everyone else wondering what's going on?
Or is it just me?
Is it just me? Or is it just me?
Where is the peace that passes understanding?
Can't I just have the understanding that brings peace? As I get older, the questions remain. Will I get to do what I really want? Will I have enough money to do it? Will my relationships last?
What do I want to do with my life?
And what happens when I die? But it's up to me, as time goes passing by,
To make the most of it.
to laugh and to cry, to enjoy the sun's warmth, to love my family,
To appreciate the people that come into my life.
to do my best and be comfortable with that.
To take comfort from the warmth of God's love.
Life is for living,
So make the most of the time you have.
So what is life? Well, life is for living. So make the most of the time you have. You know, every generation has hopes and frustrations. And so the quester lands the first thing he wants us to remember. Don't let the difficulties distract you from enjoying life. Rather, make the most of the time that you have. And then he moves into his second point that he wants us to grapple with and remember. Don't let aging and death distract you from enjoying life. Rather, live with the end in mind. See, death, it's not something we tend to talk about a whole lot. I think we tend to block it from our thinking. We try to avoid it. We spend a whole bunch of time and money trying to fight it. In fact, death isn't even here in this game of life, but it is in the reality of life. And the thing is, as I grow old, well, so will you. This is the reality. We all grow old. And you might feel that you're in that category already, or perhaps you've been described in that category. But growing old, it just seems to happen really fast. And as I get older, that process seems to happen faster and faster. In fact, I'm coming to resonate with what author Terry Pritchard said. Inside every old person is a young person wondering what happened. Can you resonate with that too? You know, I went to one of those apps this week, and I put a photo of where I am right now, and it shows me what I'm going to look like when I get older. Here's the photo right here. I'm not sure if that's what I'm actually going to look like or not, but it's kind of fun doing this. But the reality of aging, I mean, it's not actually so much fun, is it? But rather than avoid it, it's something we need to prepare for. And to prepare for it, the quester says, here in chapter 12, verse 1, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. It's a call for us to stop what we're doing amidst everything going on and ensure that we are in good relationship with the one who created us, who made this world for us to enjoy. I love these words from Bono, the lead singer of U2. He says Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books. It's a book about a character who wants to find out why he's alive, why he was created. He tries knowledge, he tries wealth, he tries experience, he tries everything. And you hurry to the end of the book to find out why, and he says, remember your creator. In a way, it's such a letdown, and yet it isn't. I agree with Bono. It might sound like a letdown, but it really isn't. Remember your creator. This is how we get through this aging and dying process. And did you notice, it's not remember God, it's remember your creator. Why is that important for us? Well, when he refers to creator, it's like the quest is taking us right back to the beginning of the Bible, right back to the Garden of Eden, right back to the beginning of humanity. And we know God made this beautiful world, a good world. But the fall brought futility and frustration with it. And so this is the reason we experience beauty in our world, but we also experience this chavel. And what he says is we need to understand that we are creatures dependent upon our Creator for our existence. And so the quester says to us, remember your Creator. Remember that you're a creature in need of your Creator. Remember, you don't have all the answers, so stop trying to make sense out of everything that happens in life. Remember to take a humble place in the world as a creature and stop trying to be like God. Remember to humbly surrender yourself to the one who created you so that you can find your true identity and find joy just by keeping in sync with what he says is good for us. He says this is the only way to get around this game of life and to be able to enjoy life even amidst the frustrations as we wait for God to make all things new. See, the question is very upfront, though, to tell us the aging process is incredibly hard. And to do this, he's crafted this beautiful poem for us. If you remember right back in our first week of the series, we had another poem that he began the book with. He said, generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. But as we come to the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, he gives us this other poem about the pattern inherent in this individual life coming to an end. He says, this is what you need to remember as you go through the aging process, to remember your Creator. And everything in this poem is going to keep coming back to that phrase, remember your Creator, remember your Creator. So this is the poem. Remember your Creator before the sun and light and moon and stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain. See, while we're young, there's always time for the skies in our life to clear. When we're old, the rain comes and all we see is another cloud behind the rain, and it's just trouble after trouble, and the light just seems to grow dim. And then the quester moves in this poem from describing the aging process like with weather patterns to describing it as a house that's starting to crumble and going through this decay process. He says in verse 3, remember your Creator when the keepers of the house tremble, the shakiness that starts to happen in our hands. And the strong men stoop, those legs that were once like strong posts in the house, they start to bow and bow. When the grinders cease because they're few, and those looking out the windows grow dim. It's like the grinders, our teeth, they get fewer in number, and our eyes, it's like the cataracts, and our vision starts to impale, and it's like looking through a dirty window at times. He says in verse 4, remember your Creator when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades. In other words, you don't hear the noise of daily life like you used to. Not only is your hearing fading, but you're just not involved in the hum of daily life. He says, remember your Creator when people rise up with the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. You have trouble sleeping. You're up with the first sound of the birds singing, even before dawn. Remember your Creator when people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets. In later years, many elderly people just lose their confidence. And often these are the women and the men who at one point, they led these massive projects. They felt invincible in the early years of their life. In the early years, they could fall over and they would just dust themselves off and they'd get back onto things again. But later on in life, fall down, it's a major risk. Fearful of what might happen when they fall or what might be around the next bend. He says, remember your Creator when the almond tree grows white, our hair, and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire no longer is stirred. A grasshopper, he says, normally it has that kind of spring in its step. But when a grasshopper's dragging itself along the ground, it's this awkward moment, isn't it? Reminding us that our spring and our zest has gone. And it's just a matter of time. And then he says, then people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the streets. So remember him, he says, before the dust returns to the ground it came from and the spirit returns to God who gave it. It's often the words we hear as we stand at a graveside, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. And then you hear the final abrupt words from the quester. Absolutely futile. Or Havel on Havel, laments the teacher. All these things are futile. In life, it goes so quickly, it just slips through our fingers. It's like a breath that goes ever so quickly. If you remember right back at week 1, I mentioned that the first man in the Bible to die was called Abel. Do you remember how his name is spelt? It's actually spelt as Havel, the same Hebrew word that the quester has been talking to us about the frustrations of life. So you see, the quester is saying to us, you're going to be like Abel one day. You're going to die, so don't pretend otherwise. I'm going to die too. I don't expect that to be anytime soon, but that's largely outside my control. In fact, each day, a little bit more of my life and your life passes us by with every breath that we take. See, life is a lot like this board game. We go around, we enjoy the moments, but ultimately, all the pieces, you get to the end of the game, and all these pieces are what? They're packed up. And we get the box out, and we open the lid, we place everything back in the box again. And this is like our life. It all goes back in the box. And the quest is saying there's going to come a day in your life and my life when our life will be placed in a box as well. It's called a coffin. And it doesn't matter how much money or time you spend trying to avoid it, the reality is your life is going to be in a box. And whether you played well or whether you played poorly, you and I will be placed into a box. Now that might sound really morbid, but the quester says that realization should affect the way we live right now. He believes that putting one foot in the grave is the best way to plant the other foot right here to live life well. So what does it mean to live with the end in mind? Well, for one, I think it changes the perspective we have on the present. Death and aging have this way of bringing perspective to the frustrations we're facing right now. One novelist said, death destroys a man, but the idea of death saves him because it changes the way we see those frustrations in front of us. Now, some of you might be overwhelmed with different work issues right now, overwhelmed perhaps with the amount of work you have in front of you. But there's going to be a day that comes when you're not going to have any formal paid work or some position or title. And there'll be in that day that you will miss what you are doing right now. One day you'll feel irrelevant. One day you might feel unwanted. And you're going to look back on these days you're in right now and you will miss them. What's more, some of you might be trying to might just be experiencing frustration in your relationships. Aging and death have this way of putting a perspective on the things that we often think that are important, but really, from a big perspective, they're not all that important. Maybe it's time to really reconcile some of those relationships. Some of you are working yourselves crazy, but for what ends? You don't even have the chance to enjoy what's right in front of you. So when we realize that everything we have and are is ultimately going to go back in a box, it should cause us to change a few things. See, living with the end in mind changes the perspective we have in the present. It also changes the way we see death that's fast approaching. See, life for many of us is like this long exercise trying to avoid reality and ignore what's coming to us. And the quest is trying to waken us up from our slumber and sit with these questions. Am I more focused on fighting the aging process or more focused on preparing for what is to come? Am I more focused on trying to avoid death or more focused on trying to grow in my relationship with my Creator? So the Question has said that these earthly bodies of ours, they're eventually going to break down, they're eventually going to decay. But for people who are in a good relationship with Jesus, our Creator, there's something to look forward to even beyond this life. I love the way the Apostle Paul picks up on this in the New Testament. He says, we know that if this tent that's our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. This new house, he says, is the resurrected body of everyone who believes in Jesus. And such a relationship comes to everybody who looks to Jesus and says, Jesus, I want you to be my Savior. I want you to be my Lord. I want to do life with you. I want to define life in the way that you see it. One of my favorite verses, the Apostle Paul says, for me, living means living for Christ. Dying is even better. And you go, I mean, how could it be even better? He says, if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. I'm torn between these two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me. But for your sakes, he says, it's better that I continue to live. So we can labor with Christ while we live, he says. We can live for Christ when we die. And a relationship with Jesus should affect the way we do life now, in the present, and right into the future. So the big question for us right now is, what does that look like for you? I mean, is that obvious to others about the relationship you have with Jesus? Are you intentionally growing in your relationship with Jesus? Or are you allowing the various activities of life to really be your prime focus and Jesus is more off to the side? You see, friend, if you're not in a good relationship with your Creator, with Jesus, this is actually the very moment to be able to say to Jesus, Jesus, I want to walk with you. I want to find a life that is truly life. And for all of us, my hope is that these words from Ecclesiastes will continue to bring perspective amidst all the futility and frustration we're experiencing right now in our world. So don't let difficulties and death distract you from enjoying life. Rather, remember your Creator and enjoy life with the end in mind. Because ultimately, everything we do will one day be folded up and all the pieces come together. The lid goes on and it all goes back in the box. Let's pray together. Jesus, our Creator, we thank you for the life you've created. And we pray that you'd help us to experience life to the full. And I pray right now for people who aren't in a good relationship with you. May they take this moment to turn to you and to seek you to be their Savior, the one they want to follow, in order to find a life that is truly life. In Jesus' name.
You're a faithful God, so good to me. Come on, we'll sing.
God of Abraham, you're the God of covenant and faithful promises. Time and time again, you have proven that you do just what you said. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting Though the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. Your history can prove there's nothing you can do. You're faithful and true. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great
no
is
one
your
like you,
name.
Never
You're so good to us, Jesus.
You're our anchor, you're our foundation.
We exalt your name.
We can trust you, God. Hold firm to you.